offer another one another time of the year when there's kind of a good chunk of time to do it. So this particular study will walk through the book of Matthew, and my aim is to talk together about discipleship, what discipleship is. So discipleship is what we in the church call your life with God, right? A process of growing as a disciple of Jesus. And so what my hope is through these 6 weeks is to talk about what the process of discipleship can and should look like, right? So there are stages to discipleship and places where we should be growing in development. And I wanted to make sure that everybody who could be here, who's part of 309, could articulate or begin to understand what does that process look like for 2 reasons. So then you could have a better understanding of where you are currently in faith and what's next for you, right? So sometimes we just get that question a lot, like, I go to church, but what's the next step? Like, or you've been going to church forever, but you've never pursued more to life with Jesus, right? So we believe people should progress in faith. So the first is to help assess where are you on this journey of discipleship and what's the next step for you. The other point, the reason I want to share in this particular study is so that you can help other people process where they can be, right? So if you have friends, relatives, acquaintances who don't yet have a life of faith, then you could help them get started on that journey and then help point them to what's next too, right? So that's what we're going to do together over these 6 weeks. We're going to look at the book of Matthew and use Matthew and the relationship between Jesus and the disciples to talk about what your life with Jesus could look like, okay? That's the hope and aim. So let's just pray together and then we'll jump in and get started, okay? Well, gracious God, we thank you so much for time together and for the gift of your word given to us. We thank you that you tell us that your word is all we need for knowing who you are and knowing what life can be like in you, and to help give us the instruction and direction we need for living the life that you want for us. So Lord, I just pray that as we spend this time together tonight, that you would be present here with us to help us know you more and to be challenged and encouraged to more of life in you. So would you just reveal something to each person here tonight that would help them love you more and pursue you more? For all of our 309 family that can't be here tonight, would you just bless them and fill them with your peace and joy wherever they're at, and help us in everything we do to point back to you. We thank you, Lord, and pray this in your name. Amen. All right, so if you think about it, every trip you've ever taken, every experience you've had, most relationships that you've had a beginning point, starting point, that usually started with an invitation of some sort, right? A girlfriend looks at you and says, let's take a road trip this weekend, right? And you pack everything up and you go. Your mom makes you feel guilty for not visiting you enough, and so you change your plans and you say, all right, we'll go see mom this weekend. A coworker wants you to meet somebody new. They've got somebody they think you'd be good friends with, or they want to set you up. They invite you to their house for dinner or out to an activity, and you meet someone new, right, that then you do end up connecting with, and you found your new best friend, right? Most of those experiences start with somebody creating an invitation, and then us agreeing to that and jumping in, right? So I'll never forget this road trip that I took one time. It was my best friend from college and my roommate. It was spring break, and unlike a lot of people in college, we had zero plans. And so we decided we should make some, and my friend said, don't you have an aunt that lives in Ohio? I said, yeah. She goes, and your house is not far from St. Louis? I said, yeah. She goes, let's make a road trip. So our road trip was, our very exciting college spring break activity was to go to Ohio to see my aunt and uncle, and they literally live in the middle of nowhere. So the fun was driving golf carts around their property and sitting in the hot tub at night. And then we went to St. Louis, where we saw the Arch and did some fun things there. And then we landed back in Kentucky at my best friend's parents' house, who have some acreage, and we rode four-wheelers, and it was snowing. It was like the anti-college spring break somehow, but was this awesome, awesome trip. So, a dream for you, a dream come true. So, what road trip or experience of yours is your favorite? Anybody have like the story of a lifetime from some adventure you took with someone? You two probably have some interesting stories. No.
Some interesting. You will never believe our trip home from vacation earlier this year.
The one at the Chicago airport.
I think you've heard it.
I may need to hear more. So you were coming home from actual vacation together.
Yeah, we were coming home from Dominican. And so our connection was through Chicago. And it was storming really bad, so it was like the end of March. And it was really bad storms. So like thunder, lightning, like just terrible weather. And it was everywhere. Like people's flights were delayed everywhere. So our flight is like the last one from Chicago to Peoria. So it's like a 9 o'clock flight.
Yeah,
so
we're supposed to get in at like 10.
we had like a 4-hour layover. So we've literally been there for like 4 hours already. So we get on the flight, we sit there, and like they come on and they're like, we're just looking at the weather. We have to make sure there's enough time to get you there, like blah, blah, blah. We're like, okay. And everybody's like, the weather's not supposed to be here for an hour. It's going to take us 35 minutes to fly home. Like, let's just go. Like, let's get it. Let's get it. Let's go. And I think, was that the flight where there was a problem with the overhead bin too? Yes. So
I fixed it.
Aaron's like yanking on and everything, but they couldn't get the overhead bin up. And so like the lady comes, or the like stewardess is like, well, if we can't get it up, we can't take off because they have to be closed. And so like people from the back are getting up. We're getting this thing closed. Like if we have to break it and take it up, they're like, she's like, we'll have to call maintenance. And everybody's like, no, like we literally need to go. Like our flight needs to leave now, So anyways, they like talk to get the door, like the thing fixed. So then they still talk about the flight, like blah, blah, and then they come on and they're like, we're gonna have to cancel the flight. And we're like, we literally sat here for 20 minutes. Like we would have been more than halfway home. Like it's literally a 35-minute flight, it's so short. So we're like, all right, and like somebody comes on and says, oh, don't worry, like we go to the, United counter or whatever. Like we think a bus is gonna come get you, like they'll bus everybody to Peoria. So like, all right, so we go there and it's just, it's a mess. Like everybody, like nobody knows what to do. Well, first of all, then they start asking like how many people would take a bus. So the bus hasn't even left Peoria yet. It's not even scheduled. Well, then there's not enough people to take it, so there is no bus. So we're literally stuck here. In line, we meet this college kid named Bailey from Washington, who happens to live like a street over from her with his dad.
Wow.
Yeah. So we meet him. He was like on his first flight by himself. He had just came home from vacation with his aunt. And she lived in Chicago, so she drove home, and then he was on his first flight by himself from Chicago to Peoria. So he's like, somehow we like got in line like around him. He's like, I don't know what to do. And we're like, we'll help you, like stick with us. So we got to know him.
We had a final the next day.
So he like really had to get home. So through everything, like we couldn't get, So we were just basically like stuck there, and because it was canceled due to the weather, they wouldn't give you a hotel or whatever. So we ended up like Bailey's like, well, I'm gonna call my aunt. So his aunt was gonna come get him, and then we were gonna ride with them back to Peoria, and then she was just gonna stay in Peoria. So we're like, okay. Well, we had tried to get a rental car, and they're like, no rental cars. Like you couldn't get a rental car for one day. Well, then we figure out this other lady is like, oh, I called and got one for a week. I'm just gonna take it back early. So then we called and ended up getting a rental car, and I'm like, yeah, I need it for like 5 days, and I'm like, really, I'm gonna bring it back tomorrow. So we get a car. So Bailey calls his aunt and cancels that plan. So like then he's riding with us. Well, when we were in line at like the agent counter, there's this Asian guy at the counter. I feel really bad for him because he's got on a cat jacket, so I know he works at Caterpillar. And he's arguing with like the person, and he's like, no, like I have meetings in the morning. I need to get to Peoria tonight. My first flight out, like that flight's I'm gonna miss my meeting and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, so
It was Charlie.
Charlie.
It wasn't, but we called it.
So, yeah, so he was there. So anyways, so Aaron, Bailey, and I like get our like luggage ticket, and we go down and we're getting like our suitcases, and we get them, and I think that's when we actually got the rental car. I think at that point we were still waiting on his aunt. So we got the rental car, and we're standing there, and like Charlie's down the way, and Erin looks at me, and she was like, so you taking the Asian? So you have to know our friendship. We're just like, great. And I'm like, well, I mean, we're gonna be like right in Peoria, so I'm like, I feel like I have to. So I like go and talk to him again, and I was like, hey, do you want to ride? He's like, oh yeah, like super excited. So we're like, all right. So we get on the little bus that like takes you to the rental car place, and Aaron and I and a college student and Charlie like start driving home, and like
Bailey was like Snapchat.
he was behind the driver's seat, and like I was
trying to
trying
take
to
a
his
nap.
his friends. Like I'm literally these two crazy girls
Charlie
that just like walking into
just
a
floated
kid.
You're picking up all the stories.
Charlie's trying to sleep because
Please
he
tell
just
me
got
how
in
you
from
have braids.
China.
And what if you have braids? That would have been better.
But like, I mean, we're in like
My
probably like
braids.
leggings and like a hoodie, our hair's pulled out, like we're traveling home from
I
like
think
a
the funniest
vacation.
part was we stopped in Pontiac and I was gonna drive the rest of the way. And we were gonna like drive into the storm, finally. We were just like, we're driving next to it kind of. And so I was like, Charlie, here's the deal, we're gonna like drive right into that. And he's like, ooh, I only see this in the American movies. I just like looked at Jess, I was like, what are we doing? Like,
I like how you
I'm
were like Charlie. We're like Bailey and Charlie. Like, listen, just no Charlie.
She's like, yeah. Well, it's funny,
Yeah,
like,
what's gonna
we stopped
happen? I
at
don't know if it's stories like that in China.
we go to the gas station. By this time it's probably like 1 a.m. So we're literally the only like 4 people at this gas station. And like the person working there had to have given us like the strangest look. Like the 4 of us walking in. I mean, it looks like something from like
Yeah.
one of those crazy movies.
But
you know?
it's seriously, all I can keep thinking is the scene from Home Alone. That's probably because Hudson makes us keep watching it, but where she's stranded and she ends up in the polka band van
Yeah.
with, what's his name? I don't know.
Minnesota polka.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. Hey, you wanna ride with me? Let's go.
John
Let's get
Candy.
in. John Candy, yeah.
The lake.
So we made it.
Did Charlie at any point cry, scream out in terror?
No, he was actually super nice. So one of the benefits is when you travel with Kat, like you have an expense bill. So
You took care of your rental.
Totally.
Sure did. Free rental. So like
We paid
we're like,
nothing for
we're like,
card and
like,
like
Charlie, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Like throw us like 20 or 30 bucks. Like, you know, Bailey, like don't worry, you know,
Yeah,
because
poor
he's
college
like,
student.
We're like, we
I
got
know he has a
Bailey.
job, yeah. So we're like, don't worry. And then when we added Charlie to the equation, like on the way home, he's like, hey, can you just send me the receipt? Like, I'll expense it. And I'm like, yep, sure can. So,
I know how this works. Happy to do it.
yeah, so, I mean,
Super. Holy cow.
that's our story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really good.
After the Dominican.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you think about every crazy road trip story, vacation, right, starts with some sort of invitation. Somebody says, let's go on vacation together, or let's rent a car, right? Or mom says, one of our craziest road trip stories was, I won't tell the story, home on Christmas Eve from Alabama to Illinois, and an ice storm came through and shut down all the interstates through Kentucky and Tennessee. And this one decides we'll off-road it for the whole night, right? Like, they all begin with somebody saying, you should come, right? We should go do this, or you should come check this out, or get your butt home, you haven't been here in a while, right? Somebody initiating the relationship or the experience, right?
That was a good trip.
So some of those, right, end up as really awesome adventures. There's some that are feel like failures. Some of those experiences feel like a disaster movie, right, or something. But even in them, there's something to learn, right? Or even for me, in some of the bad experiences or journeys that I've taken, I wouldn't have changed having the experience, right? So just because it's challenging or it doesn't go the way you think it's going to go doesn't mean something good doesn't come out of it, right? The journey, the experience is usually worth taking, right? Because you're better or different somehow on the other side of it. And then hopefully, usually there's lots of good parts too. Well, today I want to check out as part of the text that talks about an invitation. It's where discipleship really begins. In an interaction that Jesus has with the disciples. So we're going to turn to the book of Matthew, chapter 4. Well, it's later. We've got some Bibles in the library, or just pull it up on your phone, or just listen. It's good enough for me. Just like the trips that we take, journeys of faith have to start somewhere. And it's one of the things I want us to learn the best, because if we're talking about part of 309's mission, right, is to help connect with people who are disconnected from the things of faith. Either they don't have a history or background in that, or they experienced the church, maybe they didn't like it and they've been away from it a while. And I like the thought of evening the playing field by saying everybody's journey in faith has to start somewhere. I think this is where it starts. So Matthew chapter 4, we're going to start with verse 12. I'll read it out loud. We're going to go all the way through verse 25, okay? When Jesus heard that John had been put in prison, he withdrew to Galilee. Leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum, which was by the lake in the area of Zebulun and Naphtali, to fulfill what was said through the prophet Isaiah. Land of Zebulun and land of Naphtali, the way of the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people living in darkness have seen a great light, and those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. From that time on, Jesus began to preach, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near." As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Jesus went through Galilee, teaching in the synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. News about him spread all over Syria, and people brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. Large crowds from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across the Jordan followed him. So let me set the scene for you a little bit, and I like to read. We're going to study the part of the text where Jesus makes the invitation to Peter and the other disciples, but I don't ever like reading just a couple of verses by themselves. I want to make sure it's painted in a picture that's bigger than that. So we sort of saw a picture of Jesus traveling to a new area around the Sea of Galilee. He then has this interaction with the disciples, and then he goes on to begin his ministry. So just prior to this text, we're only 4 chapters into the book of Matthew, right? So the first 2 chapters are all about Jesus' birth. We hear that Jesus is the Son of God, that he is God himself who came to be with us, and who came to be in relationship, who came to work to save us, right? We hear the stories of the shepherd and the angels and the wise men. And then there's kind of a long break. We don't hear anything about Jesus' childhood or teenage years, young adult years that are really of much interest. What we know is that in chapter 3, we hear of Jesus being baptized in the Jordan River by his cousin John. And about that time, he would have been about 30 years old. So there's just kind of a chunk of Jesus' life that we don't know about. We just assume it was pretty normal, right? That he was just being raised and reared by his parents. And so just prior to this text, he had been baptized, and then he was tested in the wilderness. So essentially, he was sent out into the desert alone, where he would be tested and tried and tempted. And it was sort of a stage to prepare him for the ministry that he was about to do. It was like the boot camp, right, before you're sent out into the field, to make sure he was really focused in on the reason that he was here. So we imagine he spent a lot of time in prayer with God and a lot of time like psyching himself up for what was about to happen. So the text that we just read was literally right after his time in the wilderness. And it was kind of the moment where he began to like pull himself up by his bootstraps and kind of jump in to the mission that he was called to. This was the start of his journey with the disciples and the start of his ministry. So he's just jumping right in, right, to not just growing up and learning about life, but like, this is my purpose, my mission. It starts now. And the very first thing he does is share this interaction with those by the Sea of Galilee. So here's what I like to do first. You don't have to have any experience with the Bible or with the church to do this thing that we're about to do. What do you notice about the text that was interesting to you? What are there things that stood out to you that you do see, and are there things that stand out to you that you notice that are absent? Okay, so it's essentially, we're just gonna take a second to say if there was anything that stood out to you or you found interesting or weird about the text. I like to do that first before we sort of learn to apply it. So, yeah, anything jump out at you?
On verse 21, he saw the 2 brothers,
James and John with their father, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he just calls them to follow him. So I don't know if they were around the same age as him, if that's what he saw to become a good follower and a leader with Christ, and just kind of left that as dad. I thought that kind of stood out to me, like, why didn't their father go too?
Yeah, interesting observation, right? It was a selective invitation, right?
Right.
He didn't just say, everybody come, right? He had called a couple of people out. Yeah, interesting. Good observation.
I think it's interesting that they were fishing, and then he came along and said that they were gonna fish for people.
Yeah, if you're them,
Like, I would be like, no, I'm fishing.
yeah, no, I'm actually fishing for fish, but thank you very much. Yeah, I've often wondered, because we're making assumptions at this point, right? Like, did they think that was a crazy weird thing to say? Like,
Well, it's interesting that he proposed it in a fashion that they could relate to, but
Yeah.
he was still calling them.
yeah, like put it in their context
Yeah.
so they would maybe understand it a little bit better. But yeah, I've often wondered, did they think that was like a weird comment to make, or did it line up so with their passion and purpose, what they were already doing, that it just jived with them and they got it? Yeah.
And if they all just immediately left, I would have questioned at least a little bit.
Yeah.
Just
I would think it would
following.
go, yeah.
They're like, all right, Yeah, I don't know. Do you guys have friends like that? Do you have a friend where you could just propose anything to them and then be like, yeah, let's do it. Let's go. Okay, sounds good. Yeah? Rachel.
Look at each other like,
Well, you may need to bring brews next time, right? But Gabe's kind of like that of us, right? He's the more like, yeah, whatever, let's go. Let's do it. What are we waiting for? And I'm the planner, right? So
sometimes it's hard to shift gears if I have a mindset on something, so a lot of times I'm the guidance.
yeah, they just no questions asked, no, should I go pack my bag? Do I bring some money? What do I need?
Yeah, to be
Just
prepared.
fine. Yeah.
Well, what snacks do I need to bring?
Yeah.
I travel with snacks and drinks, so water, so.
Good point, good point. Yeah, and there's actually another scripture in the New Testament where somebody does that. Jesus extends an invitation for somebody to follow him, and they go, let me go back home.
Yeah.
And tell my family and
Shuts
bury
it
my
down.
father, and they get kind of scolded for it. And Jesus says, if you can't just come, then don't bother,
Yeah.
essentially, right? So, yeah, interesting. They just drop everything and go. Anything else? There's no right or wrong answers.
Maybe we could say Jesus.
Jesus,
Yeah,
yes,
Jesus.
Jesus is in the story.
That was the easy.
All right, so there are some assumptions that we can make pretty safely. Like, what do we know for sure happened, right? By looking at or thinking about the story, there are some specific things that we can know for sure. Is there anything that in looking at the text you say, these parts actually happened, we're not making any assumptions? Do you know what I mean? I may not be asking the question clearly, but what do we know for sure from the text?
Location.
We know their location. They are at the Sea of Galilee.
And who he saw.
We know exactly who he saw, or at least some of the people he
Right.
saw, right? What we don't know is how big the crowds were around
Right.
them, what kind of hustle and
There
bustle was
more
happening.
people that he didn't bother with.
Right? Yeah. But we know for sure, right? Simon Peter, Andrew, James, and John, and the Father, as Josh noticed, who wasn't directly asked anyway, right? Anything else that we know for sure?
He started curing people of sickness and disease.
Started curing people. We know things, right, they were fishermen by trade, right, as you mentioned. So they were at work, right? So they were working, creating an income for themselves and to sustain whatever family they may or may not have had, right? So,
I feel like that at once they left their nets, they didn't hesitate.
did not hesitate.
It's not a hesitation.
Nope. So it would be as if you are at work and you literally just walk away from your station, right? And walk out. Yeah. For me, could you imagine? Like I'm on the stage in the middle of it, or Josh, let's do Josh. Josh is like mid-song, mic drop, walks out, right? Like
That's kind of funny.
See, and
I'm going fishing for men.
I'm a yes guy. I'll say yes to stuff, but there has to be a buy-in. I have to, like if I was in there preaching or teaching or somebody just walked in and said, okay, hey, let's go, there would have to be something that I knew I wanted to be a part of, right? I mean, I wouldn't go if I had a question.
It had to have a payoff or benefit for you in some way.
So there had to be some relationship or knowledge from those two boys, those brothers, of who Jesus was.
Yeah,
There had to be something, a connection. It wasn't just a stranger walking by.
Yeah.
There had to be something.
Well, interesting. I'm about to argue with him. Yeah. So there are some things we don't know. There are some things that we're assuming about the text and aren't stated explicitly, right? One of those things is they may have known Jesus and his reputation already, right? But they may not have. Maybe it was a sense, right? Like, that's a guy I want to be with. I don't know who he is, but I want to go. So there are some places where we don't know things and we're making some assumptions. Is there anything that jumps out to you like that? Like, we don't have the answer to this, but we think maybe.
One of my first thoughts was whether or not he knew these people.
That's right.
They had any, so that definitely jumps out.
Yeah, it would change the story entirely, right? If we knew that they like kind of grew up together, had played ball together, and then it wasn't a hard buy-in for these guys, but we don't know that, right? It could have been a stranger who walks by and they willingly jump in. It could have also been that they were aware of Jesus' teaching and reputation and they wanted in, right? We don't know things like what risk were they taking and going? Were they married? Did they have children? Were their parents dependent on them for that income? And were they just walking away from all of that too? There are places when we look at the text, we are left with some questions, right? That would help us. That risk in them dropping everything to follow him would either be bigger, right? Because they left more than we anticipated, or not. So yeah, there are some things we know for sure, some things we don't know. There are some assumptions that aren't stated explicitly, but some things I think we can learn from the text that Jesus is teaching us. The first for me is that Jesus absolutely knew what he was about to do, where he was going, what the plan was, even though the disciples didn't, right? So because Jesus is the one who extended the invitation, he's the guy with the plan, right? So it's like your best friend coming up and saying, I have these tickets for this awesome concert, let's go this weekend. You may not have it all figured out just yet, but the person making the invitation usually has some sort of loose plan about what to do and where to go and how it's going to happen, right? So make a mental note about Jesus in his invitation here tells me that he knows what is going to happen, the direction that they're headed, the things that are available to them, what the possibilities are for this relationship and journey that they're going to enter in on, even though the disciples didn't know any of that. So the disciples were taking much more of a risk, right? Dropping their nets, literally leaving everything and going, right? But Jesus had to have some sense of direction and purpose and certainty about what was ahead, right? So that's one of the assumptions I think we can make about him. So I think we can also assume that Jesus was confident that he could get them to the destination, that he was capable of leading them and taking care of them. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't have extended the invitation in the first place, right? Like, if he was scared or nervous or didn't think he was capable of doing it, he wouldn't have asked them on this very risky journey, right? So I think it's important if you're not familiar with studying the text, even though we notice that there are places we have questions or uncertainties, I think what we should always look for is what does it teach us about Jesus, right? Or what does it teach us about God that we can know for sure? Things like he knows where we're going, right? He knows that he can get us through the journey and lead us to the destination. I think that it probably even says to us that Jesus knew they were up for the task, right? Now these guys had a choice to make, They didn't have to go with him, right? They have freedom to choose whether they're in or out. But I think to some extent, Jesus would have had to know that they were capable of it, right? Like they could handle it. We know that there was going to be a whole lot of difficulty ahead for them in doing this thing with Jesus. And so I think he must have known that they would have had the strength, right? The courage, the patience to endure whatever would be ahead. Kind of like he believed that they were capable of doing this with him, right? So I think those assumptions help us understand a little bit about what it means for us to take a journey in faith with Christ. See, that's really what a life of discipleship is. This thing about church and discipleship can all be boiled down to living life with Jesus, having a relationship with Jesus. And our relationship with Jesus has a starting point. It's different for everybody, right? If you're comfortable with it, I'd love to hear where your relationship with Jesus started, if that's something really recent or if it's something that you've always known. But our life of faith, even if we're just exploring it, has to start somewhere, right? There's that quote that said, what does it say? A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Right? So my relationship with Jesus started, I was born into it, right? So my parents raised me in the church and in a life of faith. But for me personally, my first experience with God was when I was 8 years old, right? Gabe's was different than that. His stories, even though we're both preachers' kids, we were both raised in the church, his story is a little different than mine. Is anybody comfortable sharing like how old they were or what they remember about where their faith started?
I was raised in the church too, but like I didn't get my faith until college.
Yeah.
Like my own individual faith. So like I actually went to Western for a semester and lived in a dorm. The guy who was going to jail for breaking and entering and all this other stuff. And my third day I was there, he tried to put stuff in my drink and we almost got in a fight. And so I go out and party. And so I ended up switching to a different dorm. A week and a half later, I got really sick with asthma. I had to drop out at Western because I think that and stress. Came back, even though I didn't want to go back to Western. I was like, fine, I'll just go back. For some reason I need to go. Went back, met some of my best friends there at CSC, Campus Students for Christ. Then they got me into it, and then I went from kind of going to church to living at the apartment to being a servant leader and small group leader and all that stuff. And so it just kind of took off.
Yeah.
So it was that process of trusting him. And I think me getting sick was actually his way of getting me back on track because I was ready to just go out and start partying because I didn't meet anybody even though I didn't want to.
Yeah.
It kind of got me back into it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it wasn't until I was older.
Yeah.
But that's how.
Awesome. Thanks. Anybody else? No pressure.
I was raised in the church. And I mean, like, I definitely got it, you know, like, I was involved. But I would honestly say that probably, like, I haven't been as close with it as I have been since I started 309. And there's definitely still, like, a lot of growth that I feel like, you know, I have to experience.
Yeah, I think sometimes Christians tend to overcomplicate what is a life of faith. And it is simply knowing Jesus and letting him know you in return. And those relationships take all sorts of different forms. They all start at different points of a particular journey. What's important is two things. That the journey starts at some point, right? That's what we would want for everybody. Literally, my desire is that every human on the planet who was ever born and ever will be born starts a journey with Jesus, right? That relationship with Jesus for different people, even once it starts, will take different shapes over time and have bumps in the road, and we'll have points where it's difficult with Jesus and points where it's better with Jesus. So the second, other than starting, the second piece is that it moves forward in some sort of way, right? So if you think about the most long-term relationship you've ever had, and I don't necessarily mean a romantic relationship, it may be a friendship. Those relationships morph and change over time, right? And hopefully, ideally, they deepen, they get stronger, they get more committed, they love each other more, they serve each other more, like even your best of friends, right? Your relationship is different now than it was 10 years ago, right? So if faith is having a relationship with Jesus, then it needs a starting point and it needs to move forward. Hence why I want to talk about what does moving forward with Jesus look like. Tonight, though, it's simply this. Jesus extends an invitation to the disciples that simply says, come follow me. Jesus tends to always extend an open invitation, not an invitation that is coerced or pressured or manipulative in any way, right? He simply says to disciples simply something like, come check it out, right? Like, come see what I'm doing. Just come watch, right? He doesn't apply any pressure. They don't have to fill out background checks beforehand. They don't have to get their life together and their act together in order to observe what Jesus is doing. They simply have to be willing to take the step to come and see, right? So life with Jesus begins with that invitation. Him saying to us, will you come see what I'm doing? And then us being willing to respond and check it out, right? I think sometimes we feel a sense of pressure that our relationship with Jesus can only begin if we have certain questions answered, or if we have our life together in some way, or we'll grow up a little bit and figure some things out, and then we can start with Jesus. But Jesus doesn't put any caveats on following him, right? I don't know if you guys have ever heard it, but since you go to church, like, have ever your non-church friends said things like, I can't go to church, it would burn down, right? Like my feet would start smoking in the parking lot, you know, like that's like.
So I just joked about that with my uncle the other week. They were
Yeah.
talking about how my uncle, like, my dad's Catholic.
Yeah.
My family's Catholic, and they were joking about how he was going to church, and I was like, wait, is he gonna come out?
Yeah. Is it gonna fall in on him? Is a pit gonna open him up and swallow him whole? I think sometimes out of maybe guilt, I don't know what it is, but people begin to think that they have to have things a certain way in order to approach the relationship with Jesus. But Jesus simply says, come check it out. He doesn't say, figure everything out first, make sure all of your questions are answered. If you're really comfortable, then you can sign this covenant on the dotted line and then come and see, right? The first step is simply come check it out. No pressure, no questions asked. And I think that's because he knows that if people are legitimately willing to just come and see what he's doing, that they'll see for themselves that he's good, right? He doesn't have to put pressure on because he will show himself to be a good and faithful and loving God, and people will want more of that. So when you think about your own life and journey, if you've been walking with Jesus already, then you might simply start reflecting on where did your journey with Jesus begin? What was the invitation that you felt from him? Like, was it, for me, it was a very clear moment at an altar where Jesus was like, live your life for me, and I said yes. For some people, right, it's more circumstantial in a sense that you need to do something different or go check something out. But you think about your friends inviting you back, right, to that program, that ministry.
And if they didn't, I don't know if I would come back.
That's right.
It made me feel comfortable.
So that invitation is from Jesus himself, right? Jesus saying, come and see me, right? But it's also an invitation we help create for other people. There may be places in our lives where somebody simply needs the invitation. Come check out what we're doing. Come check out. That's how I tend to approach it. Like, this is who Jesus has been for me. Why don't you come and see, right? No pressure, no sort your life out and get it all figured out, but a simple, open-ended invitation. Now, part of the trick is he can make the invitation, but at some point, we have to be willing to respond. Now, for the disciples at the Sea of Galilee that day, the response was an action. It wasn't a verbal agreement. It wasn't signing on the dotted line. It was responding by doing what he asked them to do. My unnamed child, it's something we work on a lot. We say, I have to catch myself all the time where I say, you're not listening to me. What I finally figured out, it's not that he's not listening, he's not doing what I want him to do, right? So if I say, pick up your toys, and he's not, I used to say, you're not listening, right? You're not listening, pick up your toys. And then I figured out, oh, he's listening, he can hear me. he doesn't want to do it, right? So I start saying, you need to do what you're told, right? That's different. So that at some point, the disciples had to do something about the invitation that was extended to them. They had to be willing to risk something, to start a journey, to enter into what Jesus was asking them to do. So just like your friend says, let's go to the Dominican, right? At some point, the person has to respond and go, yes, right? My crazy friends go, let's go college spring break in Ohio, right? Everybody else at some point has to go, okay, let's do it, right? It is an invitation, but it's an invitation that at some point requires a response. And that's where it may get a little tricky in the sense that when we don't respond or when we ignore the invitation, it is a response. We're not accepting the invitation. Let's be honest. It's like screening your phone calls and not RSVPing because you know you don't want to go, but you just don't want to tell them that you don't want to go. You're still not going, right? So when Jesus extends the invitation, us not answering it by ignoring it is still answering it. We're not participating in it, right? So I want to point out a couple of things that I think Jesus is inviting him to, but I'll ask you first. Jesus says, come follow me. For you, what does that invitation hold? What is he asking of them? No, we're making assumptions again, right? We're kind of reading into it. He doesn't say, come follow me so you can A, B, and C. But in your assumption, what are they taking on with Jesus?
I think they're taking on that they're going to be okay with the fact that he's the leader.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So he doesn't say, come, let's do this together. Yeah. Come follow, right? Yeah, that's right. If you're going to embark on this thing, then you have to be willing to let him take the lead. It's really good.
Kind of taking on faith because they don't really know what they're going to be doing either.
That's right. So there is no agenda, no schedule of activities for this trip that they're going on. So at some point, they're just having to blindly trust, right? Have faith that whatever he's going to do with them is good, right?
I guess they knew they were going to have some interaction with people, right? Because he said, I'll make you like, or
Fishers of men.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
they knew they were going to have some interaction with people.
Mm-hmm.
Like he might be the leader, but they would still have some role.
Yeah.
Right? Like they just weren't gonna like follow him, and I mean they would still have some role if they were gonna fish for people or fish for men.
Yeah, that he's implying in that statement they're serving with him in some way. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I'm gonna teach you something, I'm gonna give you a new skill, right? There's an implication that they're sharing in some sort of work together. They're learning something together, right? Something new. Yeah, you guys are good. I noticed 3 things about what Jesus is inviting us to. I think he's inviting us to an experience. So now they didn't know what that experience would be. We know looking back on it that it meant watching people be healed, watching Jesus perform miracles that probably took their breath away. But it also involved things like persecution and hardship and not having a place to sleep, and eventually literally watching their best friend, teacher, leader be put to death before them. This thing that we're doing with Jesus is an experience, right? It is as if we're embarking on a road trip or an adventure, a vacation, where this person is taking the lead, we're having to blindly trust. But it will lead us to experiences that take our breath away, that will teach us something, that will equip us for something bigger than we had planned for ourselves. We're signing up for an experience with Jesus. But the second is we're signing up really for a relationship with him. So not only do these guys learn things from Jesus and grow personally, they grew in their love and friendship for Jesus. So what we know is that these guys were, at the very least, maybe they knew Jesus' reputation, but we don't have any implication that they were in a relationship or friendship already. So they were maybe strangers or acquaintances, and by the end of their journey together, they're like family and best of friends, right? They're mourning Jesus' loss, and they deeply care about one another. They were considered best of friends and teacher-student. And so this thing that they entered into with Jesus wasn't just to experience something, but it was also to experience a relationship with the very Son of God, right? And then, like Jess pointed out, I think it's also calling them an invitation to a new purpose. So the job that they had in fishing was literally like low on the totem pole kind of work, right? It was not, it didn't have a good reputation to be fishermen. It wasn't great income. It was essentially scraping by, right? And when Jesus calls them to leave their nets and to fish for people, he was giving them a purpose that was bigger than just casting nets to make some money, right? He was inviting them to invest in something that I think would probably fulfill them in some really significant ways and challenge them and help them to feel like they were built for a bigger purpose than just casting a net into the water. So whenever we study the text, the things that we learn about Jesus and the things we learn about his interactions with people aren't just true of those people, they're true of us too, right? That's how we learn from the Bible. So when we say that Jesus is inviting the disciples to an experience, to a relationship with him, to a new purpose, that invitation just isn't to the disciples, it's to each of us, right? So when you are invited by Jesus, that's exactly what you're invited into. You're invited into an experience with him, experiencing your life through the presence and work of the Son of God, right? You're being invited to a relationship with the Son of God, and sometimes we underestimate that, like that he wants to know you, he cares about your life, he's interested in helping you grow, right? He wants to experience life with you, just like a friend or someone you would care about. You're being invited to share in this with someone, and that someone happens to be the Son of God, which is really cool. And then he's also inviting you to a bigger purpose, right? Something that is beyond you living day to day and going to work to check that off the box for the day or to pay the bills. He's able to give you a purpose and a call and identity that can give you a passion for something that is bigger than your everyday life, right? He gives you a new purpose as you invest your life with him too. So in the coming weeks, we're going to talk about what each step is. And tonight, the first step is invitation. That Jesus extends to us and to everyone the invitation to simply say, come follow me, come see what's going on. No questions asked, no pressure, just come and see. So this week, before we have our study next Wednesday, I just want you to spend some time thinking about that. Think about where your journey with Jesus began. If it is still beginning, then maybe this just gets marked as the moment where you say, I'm dropping my nets and I'm following Jesus. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to accept the invitation. And then I'd also like you to maybe be thinking about people that you know in your life that you think need to hear the invitation. Now, I don't want to put any pressure on you. I'm not talking about you like sitting somebody down and having some weird conversation with them. I just really want you to start thinking about who are the people in your life that you think may be looking for something more, so that maybe you just begin to think about them and pray about them in a different sort of way, that they would be ready to hear the invitation. Your homework assignment is to just reread that text, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 times just before we're together again to get more familiar with it. And here's the trick. When I read, before I sit down and read a passage, I don't care if it's a chapter or if it's 10 chapters. I simply say this before I start reading. I just say, Lord, would you show me something of yourself in the word today? And he'll do that work, right? It doesn't matter if you know how to pronounce all the words or not, or if you read it and you go, that made absolutely no sense to me. Just say, Lord, would you show me something as I read this today? And he'll show up and give you a nugget that's good for you for the day or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, so your homework assignments are to reread the text, to think about when did you hear the invitation from Jesus. If you're a person who journals or writes, maybe you write down that story. Maybe you process your beginning relationship with Jesus with a friend or a relative or somebody like that. Just tell the story to somebody else if you'd like. But then be be thinking about one or two people that you think maybe you need to be thinking about and praying for, who are looking for something else and maybe need that invitation from Jesus, okay? So that's easy. Tonight's easy. It's where it starts, right? Always starts with an invitation, and it's Jesus saying, come check it out, right? Do you guys have any questions about it, or about the text, or literally just questions about anything before we kind of break for the night?
I have a question about the text.
Yeah.
So obviously being newer to this, so I just still I'm actually glad you said, one of the first questions I had with Aaron, like a little over a year ago, was like, where was like little boy Jesus and teenage Jesus? Like, where was all that? I've had that question for like over a year now. But I would always like grill her after church.
Yeah.
I'd be like, okay, I'm going back to her house. I have all these questions. And
Aaron gets the checklist.
Yeah, so she's been my help. But it said his journey started when he heard that John had been arrested.
Okay.
That was one thing I'm thinking, and I'm like, I'm gonna have to do my research on that. Like, what is that?
Yeah. Okay. So do you remember? So in this sermon series we've been doing, where we talked about the angels, the first person we talked about was this couple, Zachariah and Elizabeth.
Mm-hmm.
They were an older couple, and an angel appeared to them and told them they would become pregnant. It was that baby that is John, and we call him John the Baptist. And John the Baptist's mom, Elizabeth, was cousins with Mary, the mother of Jesus. So Mary and Elizabeth are cousins. They have John and Jesus, and they're cousins. But John grew up to be a prophet, which is simply a person who gives messages of Jesus. And the message, people had to think he was crazy, because he was walking around the countryside yelling at people to repent, which means to like return to God. And he wore camel hair, and he ate locusts and honey, and he lived in the wilderness. He was, by today's standards, and probably then, probably seemed crazy cakes, but he was on a mission to begin to prepare people for Jesus' coming. So since they were cousins, I'm sure they were close, but they also shared this special mission, right? Jesus, the Son of God, coming to save the world, and John, his cousin, who was supposed to prepare everybody for Jesus' coming, right? And John had done a lot of work getting people to follow him, getting people to respond to God. He would baptize people. And he was actually the one who baptized Jesus just before this. So John was arrested for many reasons, but mostly because he was the crazy cakes guy sending religious messages that the government and other leadership didn't want him to send. And people would be imprisoned back then simply for preaching about God and talking about God. And so he was put in prison. Later, he was beheaded by King Herod, and it was one of Jesus's saddest moments we see in Scripture, just that devastation for him. So cousins, best of friends, but they shared in this mission of God. John was the first to know that Jesus was the Son of God, the Messiah. I mean, other than Mary and Joseph, but right? Yeah.
So kind of for Jesus to start this journey then, like it wasn't a direct invitation, but that was kind of his invitation, was John finally getting arrested, where he was like, okay, I need to go do something, or
yeah,
obviously felt compelled to go start some type of journey.
Right, like this
Right,
is a place we're making a guess, right? Like it doesn't say.
Yeah.
It says because John was arrested. It doesn't say in more detail to that it freaked Jesus out and he decided that this was the time to start his ministry. But we're kind of making that assumption that because John's ministry was on pause, at least for the moment, that yeah, maybe that's the thing that said, okay, it's time for me to start what I've come here to do. Yeah, there was something about John's arrest that compelled him, right, to start his journey. But it's one of the places I think we get frustrated in reading the Bible, and here would be my advice. There's lots of things that the Bible doesn't tell us, right? It doesn't tell us what his family life was like. If he had we know he had other brothers and sisters. We don't know how many, right? We don't know. We assume he learned the carpentry trade. We don't know. There's a lot of things we don't know. So instead of, when I get discouraged by that, I just try to look at the text that's in front of me and say, what does it say, right? And what are some clear assumptions I can make by what it says? And if I can't answer the questions about everything else that's in between, I just try to ask God to give me peace to let it go, right? Until he gives me some clarity about it. So like I said that about the wise men this Sunday, because a lot of people get hung up on the wise men. Were there 3 of them? Were there not 3 of them? Were they kings? Were they just wise men? Like, where did they come from exactly? And they get so fixated on the questions, like those questions, that they can't see the message in what they did come to do and what it teaches us. So I just, it's good to ask the questions, but don't let them so frustrate you that you can't get the good out of it too. That's, yeah, really good question about John. Yeah, he was just crazy. It's good crazy, like crazy for God, but good.
Well, that makes me think then too, like if he heard he was arrested, and like the fishermen, like if they knew John was arrested, and then they're like, oh, well, he was preaching this is gonna happen, and like this guy just showed up and said to follow him, like,
Yeah,
it must have been true, it must have been right. Like,
that's right. We can assume that there was like
just had his life on
gossip and talk among the Jewish community, right, about what was happening. Took longer for news to travel, but yeah, they were probably like, did you hear what happened to John? Oh my gosh. And yeah, maybe they were, maybe it was a sensitive time and that made them more responsive. Yeah, we don't know exactly why they were so willing to just risk it all, drop everything, leave the station, go with him. Yeah. But I like to say, but at some point they just chose to like fish or cut bait. On that note.
Yeah, crazy cakes.
Crazy cakes, fish or cut bait. So next week, where we're going next week, the next stop on the journey is an invitation from Jesus to just observe him, to watch him and learn from him. That's what we'll be talking about then. The gang from Eureka will be back. We may have tacos again, a different kind of taco, because the whole Eureka gang are obsessed with tacos, and they were really bummed that they missed tacos tonight. So, we have several Eureka College students who come to 309, like Brody Hibbard and his girlfriend Lakin, and Brody's sister Maddie and Mallory, and Hannah Schultz and her boyfriend, and so there's some of them, but they're all on a road trip right now. They're skiing. Yeah. I know. Like, I'm like, good for you.
Skiing or like Illinois skiing?
I have a feeling like Illinois skiing, but
I guess
I don't know.
we know what happened to snow right now.
Yeah.
I've only been there when it was fake snow, so it was not.
Right, and fake
It was
snow
really
is terrible to
hard.
ski on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
I mean, I'm no better on real snow either, but
Where do you go skiing in Illinois?
oh my gosh, like
Galena.
Galena and Northwest corner.
Always go
We're so good to
Wisconsin.
the island.
Where?
Yeah,
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. The very first place I ever went skiing was like seriously the middle of Indiana. It was all fake snow. I know, right? Indiana's the
It
flattest
was
state of
I grew up
Iowa.
like almost to Minnesota, so we went to Minnesota.
And then I did Colorado, and that was just bad news. I've decided that it was beautiful, but I'll be the person who sits at the bottom by the fire with the cocoa and watches your bags. That's what I'll do. While you guys
Why?
ski.
Pretty scary.
I just essentially like fell my whole way down the slope. There was no point.
That's not encouraging.
No.
We have an uncle and aunt and cousins that live around Colorado, and he's always said that like we would be good at it, but like that's not very
I
promising
mean,
there.
I've never been known for my athletic ability, so don't
I
tell me.
mean, me either. I've broken my toes